Okay, we're going to do a random introduction, so it'd be good to know your name, your role, organization, and what your question is. So your question may be self-evident. It may not need any explanation, or you might just want to give it a couple of sentences of explanation. So let's just go around, and as you're listening to people's questions, just sort of be aware of any common themes that you're hearing. So let's kick off with Leif.
Yes, hello. My name is Leif Peterson. I'm a Senior Commodities Advisor in the Green Commodities Program. So I'm supporting different country teams around the world. I had the question, how do we better connect the global companies to national governments? The reason is that I think we're quite good at engaging nationally present companies in the national dialogue processes that can be exporters or trading companies that have local representation. But it's a lot harder to get the global buying companies represented who might not be in the country. So I think that's an issue we haven't really figured out. So that's the reason why question.
Thanks, Leif. I'm just going to go down the list of who I'm seeing on my screen. So I'm going next to Alex. Do you have a question?
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexandra, and I work for the Green Commodities Program. I'm based in Panama. And my question was more a practical one. So based on your experience, who's better at fulfilling commitments, the private or the public sector?
Thanks, Alex. Now we've got Popo Dedi.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. Yeah.
You hear my voice?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Popo Dedi Iskandar. I'm working with CI in South Tapanuli. My role is as sustainable policy coordinator in provincial level. My question is, do you have related experience how to engage the private sector closely between public and then private, how to engage both of them?
Okay.
So that's all from me. Thank you.
And then we've got Micah, or however was it Mika?
Meike.
Meike.
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Meike Carmen. I am actually working back in Green Commodities in Peru. It's just for a period of time. Actually, it's my last week. My question was how we can develop strong roles that involves stronger compromises from the private sector, especially. It's kind of the same question. It involves also public sector. How can, through the public sector, develop stronger roles that the compromises that the private sector has with the public sector works better? It's more related there. Thank you.
I don't quite understand that. What's the, could you just give an example?
Yeah. A quick example, I see that many companies have different ways to develop their work in different countries. The countries depends on how the rules are in each country. And in countries where they have stronger rules, for example, in the coffee sector, let's say Nestle have a way to develop his work in Colombia and has a different way to develop his work in another country, let's say Africa. It depends how the rules are in each country.
And
so my question is related, how can we help? Sorry, what?
Could the word you're looking for is commitment?
Yeah, it's commitments. Yeah, let's say, in the private sector, but I think it has to do with the public sector. Making it more confusing.
Yeah, let's just keep going on this one. What you're saying is that you see that different countries have different, local rules, regulations, legal infrastructure, etc. And you're saying that companies adapt their approach according to each different country. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
And you're saying, how can we take best practice from one part and take it elsewhere rather than make it different in every country?
Yeah, maybe thinking how these companies can have like the same of the best roles that they develop for one country, also for the other countries, not just adapting themselves and each country to the local roles. It's also how they can commit their own strong roles for all the countries where they are working with.
And then in respect to the public sector, is it also about different governments learning from each other in terms of the sort of regulatory frameworks that exist in other countries or not?
Yeah, could, but I think that's more difficult. It's more from the private sector than they can get it for each country than each public sector having the same roles. It's more in that way.
Okay, thank you. Jordan?
Hi, I'm Jordan Swift, and I work on monitoring and evaluation at the World Wildlife Fund. So related to that, my question about this is, how are we looking at our corporate engagements, and is there a way that we can be more, I guess, objective in deciding whether or not they're effective and whether they're getting what we want and whether they will get what we want, other than just reflecting on our personal relationship?
Good question. So yeah, I guess implied in that is maybe an observation that a lot of these corporate partnerships are just based on relationships. Do we get on with each other? Are we like-minded, rather than actually whether or not they are effective?
A little.
Okay, thank you. Rini?
Hi, thank you, Charles. Hi, everyone. My name is Rini, and I'm the National Platform Manager for palm oil platform called Foxbee, or Sustainable Palm Oil Platform in Indonesia. So my question is actually how to build an effective communication strategy and perhaps also key messages to increase private sector buy-in to our work, to the National Action Plan, and also to the platform. Thank you.
Thank you. Cynthia?
Hi everyone, good morning and good night. I'm Cynthia. I'm the Stakeholders Engagement Officer for the National Platform Palm Oil in Indonesia. So my question is how to creating sense of urgency to ensure the company's contribution, meaningful participation and contribution to the implementation of the National Action Plan or the platform activity, and how to developing kind of reward, since the company objective is maximum the profit things or the profit oriented. So how to quantifying or developing some reward to attract them.
Okay, thank you. And now the order of my screens has got all mixed up for some reason. I'm going to go next to Jessica.
Hi, everybody. Jessica Permansky with CI, and my role is Director in Sustainable Agriculture. My question was how to tackle fatigue within private sector so that as soon as they see an NGO or someone else approaching them, they don't automatically shut down or kind of come up with a defensive answer that they're already engaged or doing X, Y, and Z. So how to kind of push past that.
Great. Now, Emilio Cabrera.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Emilio. I'm also here at the Panama office with the Green Commodities program. I'm the newest intern here. So my question was in relation to what are the lessons that the Green Commodities program or UNDP have learned from working directly with the private sector? Or what are some of the things that we can learn as well from them, whether it's, for example, their communications, strategy models, how they work with the units, how they work with other sectors. What are some of the things that we can also learn from them?
Thank you. And now Pascal Fabier.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Pascal Fabi. I'm responsible for this community of practice here, notably. I just had a call with a big French international bank an hour ago called BNP Paribas. And the purpose of the call was to interest them on our work, global work and national work, and try to get them to see the value of joining some lesson learned discussions in this community of practice. And they were not very impressed. Very clearly, they had very little time, and they said that they are part of too many initiatives, very hard-nosed. So my question relates to actually a subset of the private sector, the bank, who are actually supplying financing and risk management strategy to commodity companies, and how do we engage the banks, which are critical actors in our equation of change? How do we engage them in our national work, and how do we engage them behind the closed door of their banking association to talk to us about what gets them excited?
Great, thank you, Pascal. Let's go to Matthias. Have you gone yet? You're on
yes, hello.
mute. Yeah.
Yes, hello. Hey, good morning. Hey, I have the same question as Pascal. We really want to have more private sector people in the community. So my question, my request is to understand how we can engage them in this community, so we can share more experience with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiefer.
Hello. Yeah, my question is about how to engage buyer companies, because I think it's important to differentiate between in private sectors, not the same thing. Buyer companies, how to engage them in long-term dialogue processes that do not entail any income from them. What are the tricks of the trade? Thank you. And I'm a program officer in Costa Rica, for those who don't know me, and advisor to the Green Commodities program.
Thank you, Kiefer. Let's go to Pisha.
Hey, I'm Pisha. Can you hear me? So I'm I'm the GGP coordinator for Indonesia's production project, and my question was, how do you actually restore trust between the government and the private sector? Because we've been trying so hard to have a good meeting where private sector and government can attend and have a civil conversation about issues, but it's pretty hard.
Thank you. Let's go to, I've got, sorry, I don't see your full name, and I've forgotten what it is. Bharati?
Yeah, hi. I'm Bharati from CI Indonesia. I'm based in North Sumatra. Actually, I have the same question with some of the other participants. How to build the trust to the company, particularly on the palm oil sectors, that we really need their commitment and stronger role through the real sustainability.
Thank you. And let's go to, we're down to the last four now, I think. Jairo?
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Jairo Serna. I work in the Costa Rica office. I provide support to the Pineapple platform here in the country. And my question is about the engagement, not only during the process of dialogue, also during the process of implementation. So I just want to know what we can do to keep the engagement during the dialogue process. That is a long and hard process, and keep that engagement during the implementation process, mainly because the companies, they're going to have to invest some of their money to implement all, some of the actions that are included in the National Action Plan.
Thank you. And let's go to Sandra.
Hello, everybody. Sandra Andraca. I'm the Fisheries Platform Coordinator here in Costa Rica. And I think that my question is related to many of the questions of other participants. I think Cynthia, Rini, Kifan, right now Jairo. What is the best type of alliance with the private sector? And agree with Kifa that when we talk about private sector, we work with a variety of private sector, so depends on the interest of a buyer or a fisherman, so they are very different, a company or a fisherman association. So from the UNDP point of view, from the platform's point of view, what is that we can offer? What is our hook? Or also our key messages to the private sector to ensure that they are engaged with our process. Thank you.
Thank you. Now let's go to Carlos.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carlos. I work in the office in Quito of the UNDP. And exactly, I have the same question that Sandra and Jairo. How do we make this platform more attractive, I would say, in order to keep the companies participating actively on the activities of the platforms are being doing. Thank you.
Thank you. And Edgar.
Hello. Good morning, Edgar here, and I'm the head of the Food and Agriculture team for WWF Brazil. And over the last years, we have been engaging a lot, especially with the soy and the cattle sector here in Brazil. Mainly focus on the deforestation, conversion of natural ecosystems commitments. We are also part of the Good Growth Partnership related to the demand part of it. And I think that one question that we are discussing a lot at this moment is about how we can shape our communication or our message to the companies in order to be more effective. Like I think that we many times make the discussion much more complex than the companies are expecting to get in terms of information. And I think that this has been one of the challenges as civil society that we need to understand and get over it. We just did a study on mental models of how companies perceive this discussion on deforestation. And it was very interesting to see that the views that they have of the civil society is very much related to that we can't give them a clear message about what needs to be done and how it needs to be done and what are the solutions and things like that. So I think that shaping our message is one of the key points that I would like to understand how to do it. Over.
Fantastic. Is there anybody I've missed? How about Rico? Rico, are you there? Can't hear you, even though you've gone off mute. Okay, I can't hear Rico. Maybe a problem with the mic. Anyone else? Okay, does anybody want to make any observation or reflection on all of the questions that we've just heard? Has anyone sort of, anything struck anybody? Anyone seen any particular themes and patterns? Anyone care to try sort of synthesis of what they've heard?
Yes. Charlie?
Yeah.
It's Pascal. Just a reflection. For the past 15 years of my career, I work in the private sector, and then I cross over to the development sector. And when I cross over to the development sector, I brought some skills to the development sector, the NGO world that were not very common, and the skills were some were good, some were not necessarily very valuable. But one of the key skills was pragmatism, clarity, simplicity, and goal orientation. Over the years, I think I've maybe the skills have a bit eroded. I've gone soft in the development sector. But nevertheless, when I hear colleagues here, what seems to me engaging the private sector is an issue of the format of the message, the substance of the message, the channel that is going to be used for the message, and the messenger. So it's not only about how we need to break this down into manageable pieces. Clearly, the private sector is hard-nosed, and they won't get very impressed by something that has no direct value added to their bottom line or to the intermediary aspect of their bottom line. So sometimes our message is not just the right one, and we need to hear from them how they would respond to us. So before I get on with it, I think we need to break this down. Sometimes the messenger is the wrong person. You need to speak, companies speak. If you speak donor or developmental speak with a company, they won't hear you. It's like speaking a different language. And the timing is another issue. Speak to the wrong time of the year or the wrong moment in the annual cycle, and you get the wrong answer. So I think we need to break this down. And my sense is that the people who will tell us the best how to talk to them are the people we want to talk to. So I think there is, I would hope to see a couple of trusted partners. We've established big level, high level partnership with companies at the local, national and global level. Let's have them around this table and tell us how to talk to them, when to talk to them, what gets them excited. That's my suggestion.
Thanks, Pascal. Anybody else got any other reflections so far? So I'll offer mine, which are, that I've also been grappling with this question of complexity. That I'm launching a project at the moment specifically looking at this issue of how the private sector can be more effective in their collaboration with government. And I think the fundamental dilemma is that the nature of our work is complex. We're trying to work systemically, we're trying to work over time with multiple parties, the results are unpredictable, and the companies don't necessarily want to hear that. They want something that's simple, short-term, clear what the outcomes are going to be. So I hear a lot of people grappling with that. There's some of the questions relate to sort of communication and key messaging, which is, there's a dilemma for me, which is how do we take the complexity of our work and not sort of reduce it to something that fundamentally is rich, it is complex, it is systemic, but actually frame that something about how do we explain why that is necessary, And by contrast, how do we explain that simplistic reductionist short-term measures can often fail to produce results? Because it seems to me that's what the private sector has been doing for a long time, is trying to find simple, easy problems to solve, or easier problems to solve, define, control. And that strategy isn't working. So we need to somehow educate people about why it isn't working, why more systemic ways of operating are necessary, but also offer them a sort of a menu of options for how they can engage with that. So accept the fact, or help educate the private sector this is by definition messy and complicated, but then offer them like a suite of options for engagement. So some of them can engage in quite, simple, minimal ways, and others can, who are sort of more advanced companies, can engage more in the complexity and the messiness. But I found that the question process to be helpful there. Just even getting all these questions out on the table, I think is useful, because we see some of the common issues and themes, and certainly I think these questions probably will stick through us through the stream. But we can also think about how we can create some outputs and deliverables that maybe will help you answer some of these questions. Matthias, I just want to check with you, everything that's in this chat box, do we get the option to download it at the end of the call or capture it somehow? I just want to make sure we don't lose it.
I'm capturing all.
You're capturing all the questions, so you're downloading them as we go?
Yep.
Okay. Good. So this is the part of the discussion where we're quite well into the time, but I'm hoping that we'll get an issue to work with. And from what I heard, there were a couple that struck me. One was that we could work with Costa Rica, and your questions. You had some questions about keeping long-term dialogue going, keeping engagement through a long-term process. Also from Indonesia, we heard questions around how do we get effective communication and key messaging? How do we develop a sense of urgency for engagement and implementation of the NAP? There was a question which I think applies across the board around how do we deal with fatigue. I think it plays into this question of framing and positioning and clear communications. So a good question for us to work with is one that feels like it's a real question. It's not just an abstract question. It's a real question that you're dealing with at the moment, and where you think you could get some value from this group. And I'll just explain what the process is. So as I'm describing this, just think about whether you want to bring your question into this, because you get the benefit of the group intelligence on your question. So what we'll ask you to do is basically explain what your issue is and what you want from what you would like to get out of this discussion. We will then ask some clarifying questions. Those are just if there's any additional information that we feel we need in order to be able to have the discussion, or if there's anything we're not clear on, if there's anything we haven't understood. So we'll each get the chance to ask one clarifying question, which we'll put into the chat box. And then we'll have a discussion, and this is what I call deepening questions. So this is where we'll all have the opportunity, again, through the chat box, to ask a question. We'll have one question each. So we'll harvest questions from the whole group. If you're the issue holder, you don't have to respond to every question. But some of the questions you might find to be provocative questions that help you to think through more deeply your issue, or help you to think about a perspective that you haven't thought about already. And then at the end, we'll have a learning review round in terms of what did we learn from this, in terms of our own insights on the content, and also about the process. Did the process work? Was it helpful? you know, is this a format we can use going forward, or do we want something else out of this group? So just be good to hear whether anyone's up for experimenting with this process in terms of bringing in issues. So I mentioned Costa Rica and Indonesia, but anybody else is welcome to as well. And what I imagine is one person will lead on the presentation of the issue, but other colleagues might jump in and bring in other angles. Okay, so if I can go first to, well, Kiefer and Jairo, are you interested in this potentially?
Okay, thank you for volunteering us.
Well, I'm not volunteering you, I'm just asking you a question because I'm going to ask the others as well.
Okay. Yeah, no, we're happy to do it. So just go through this issue presentation?
Yeah, I just need to find out if the others are up for it as well. What's your level of interest, marks out of 10?
No, I mean, it's okay. I think we can learn from the discussion. I'm keen to see what people want to chip in. Jairo?
Okay, I just want to, before you go, I just want to go to Indonesia. Are you interested in doing this? Either Rini, Cynthia, and any of the other sort of CI and WWF, are you interested from an Indonesian point of view? Nobody's jumping forward.
Charlie, I think, yeah. You
Sorry?
can move forward. Yes, we are interested for this.
Anybody else interested?
Sandra, are you not interested in the fisheries there?
Hello. Yes, unfortunately, I have to leave because I have to join other meeting. I apologize for that, but yes, of course, I'm interested, but I think I cannot contribute right now. But Kifan and Jairo are there, so I'm sure that they can also contribute on the fisheries platform.
Could you just, Kiefer, I just want to hear from both of you. I'll hear from Kiefer and then I'll hear from Rini. Kiefer, if you would just say what your issue would be, what would it be in a couple of sentences?
Okay, so the issue is that Costa Rica is in the green commodities platform is probably the first experiment that we had with platforms. We launched this in the year 2011 and we've been running ever since. So we've gone through the whole cycle. We've contributed to the theory of change of how platforms work. We basically are the ones who made all the mistakes that were in the guidance documents that I'm hoping all of you guys don't make. And then the issue, what's the issue? The issue is that since 2011 until now, we're dealing with the same private sector stakeholders. And I want to differentiate between the producers and the buyers. And in terms of the producers, we've seen a fluctuation of interest, engagement, and attitude towards the platform. So from the point of view of the producers, we've had an initial open interest when we launched the platform to join. They saw it as an opportunity to sort of clean the face of the pineapple sector because there was a lot of accusations of wrongdoing and externalities. And on the side of the buyers, they saw it as an opportunity to be seen as responsible buyers who are interested in the long-term processes in the country to improve and to get rid of these externalities. The thing is that this has been running since the year 2011 with very little funding, with very little support. A lot of the time is Jairo by himself dealing with this. I'm sure it's a sort of a feeling that some of you guys get in your own countries. So the issue and the question is, we've seen a fluctuation of interest. We've seen from the producer side how they've gone from being very interested to when they realized that there was an opportunity for government to improve enforcement of externalities and agrochemical runoff into water sources and different problems that we have with pineapple in Costa Rica, then they sort of withdrew their support. Because they withdrew the support, other private sectors that are not of the same level of interest or the same kind of fears that the producers would have, meaning the buyers, they also sort of reduced their interest. So how do we deal with these fluctuation of concerns that we see in a long-term process of dialogue? Because it's not just dialogue. We're proposing actions, and then and it takes sometimes from the moment that you propose the action until everybody understands what exactly that action entails. So we talked for years about officializing an action plan in Costa Rica, and once we were about to officialize it, then the private sector in Costa Rica, the producers, realized that, oh, well, that might mean more government involvement and enforcement of activities and policies in our own farms, and maybe we don't like that. So then they withdrew. So that's the issue. How do we deal with this fluctuation, and what are the tricks of the trade to keep people involved in the same kind of level of interest, or at least participating?
Okay, Rini, could you say what would your issue be from Indonesia?
Okay, so our issues with Indonesia is that since the platform was established in 2014, and then since 2015 we developing the National Action Plan for Sustainable Palm Oil, and then we are in the phase of finalization of the National Action Plan and going into the implementation of the National Action Plan, while also waiting for the legal umbrella of the National Action Plan. Since the development of National Action Plan, we have involved private sector in the discussions, and also in the platform work, the private sector are already involved. However, when we are approaching them to implement the National Action Plan, they are not yet willing. They said that they will support the National Action Plan, but they still wait and see on how the National Action Plan going to be implemented by the government. So government is actually playing a key role in ensuring that the NAP is implemented, and this is also to encourage the private sector to implement the National Action Plan. So I kind of wonder, well, the message from them is quite clear, but we're not really sure on how actually they are going to implement, or whether they are willing to implement the National Action Plan. So I kind of wonder what kind of, are we delivering the right messages to the private sector on the National Action Plan, or or is it, or our communication is effective for that? And then I think Cynthia also asking whether we should develop incentive for the private sector if they are implementing the National Action Plan. Yeah, so I think that's the issue. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to make an executive decision, which is to go with the Indonesia question. They actually seem a related, similar kind of question, although Costa Rica is at a later stage.
Hey, Charlie, I want to add something, if it's possible.
Yeah.
Just be clear, when we talk about the private sector and when we talk about the producers, it's important to see that we have different levels and different scales of production, yes? Because as Kifa said, we have this issue with the transnational producers mainly, you know, because when we talk with the small producers and some of the medium scale producers, they have a different point of view. So I just want to add that when we talk about this sector, we talk about a really complex sector, you know, because we have several scales and sometimes we have a mix of different kind of productions inside a single company. So
yeah.
To keep that clear, you know, then we have
so
that.
actually talking about the private sector as a single category doesn't actually make a lot of sense when you break it down, because it's very, very different depending on the size of the company, depending on the state of the value chain. Obviously, the involvement of a producer is going to be very different from the involvement of you know, say a sort of manufactured goods company that is just sourcing raw materials, or a retailer. Very, very different situations. So yeah, point well made. So yeah, the reason I'm going with Indonesia is partly because I mean, they're related questions. For Costa Rica, you're at a bit of a later stage. It's about maintaining involvement later on in a process. Indonesia, it's at a particularly critical stage where it's going from the National Action Planning process implementation. On probably one of the biggest global issues in the whole sustainable sourcing space. And I think we're all collectively within GCP trying to figure out how to make sure that transition is effective. And I'm also aware that on the line we've got some other colleagues from CI and WWF involved in that. So that seems like a good one to go with just for this call. So I think we've heard enough from Rini. What I'm going to ask you to think about is if you have any clarifying questions for Rini. So just go to the chat box and just think, is there anything you haven't understood? Is there anything more you need to understand in order to get further into this conversation? And this is clarifying questions are questions to do with you know, fact or information. We're going to have another round of questions in a second. So just type into the chat box anything that you want to get clearer on. What she said was that at the moment, moving from NAP development into implementation, the companies are sitting on the sideline waiting to see what the government will do. It's not clear whether or not, how or whether they'll be willing to engage in the implementation process. She's wondering if we need to get clearer on messaging to the private sector, and also mentioned whether or not we need to think about incentives for engagement. What's the value added for them? Is there anyone else from the Indonesia contingent who would like to add anything to what Rini has described? How about Cynthia or Pisha?
Hi, Charlie. Thank you. Could you please repeat? Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Could you please kindly repeat? What is the questions?
Cynthia, is there anything you want to add to what Rini said about what you think the question is in respect of the challenges around this topic for where you're at in the process?
Yeah, I mean, in the context of Indonesia, it's yes, we would like to having their meaningful participation and contributions in terms of they are also actively as a team, as a platform or member of the platform, they also actively engaging their, for instance, if we are working with the business association, then they also actively influencing their members. Currently, we are not really having that kind of yeah, that kind of sense from the business association to really get some activity to influencing their members to contribute to this kind of the multi-stakeholders dialogue or the implementation of the NAP. They are quite more waiting, especially waiting for the government commitment. That's from my side. Thank you.
Okay. So far we've
Hey,
got
Charlie.
yeah.
I just want to add something. This is like a real case that we're facing right now. I mean, part of the NAB action plans is not only to strengthen the farmers, but also the environment aspect. So there is a company, I don't need to mention the name, they're working with us to train the farmers. But when it comes to conservation, when we want to implement, let's say, the high conservation value per RSPO, let's say, certification standard, they do not even want to meet us. They do not even want to talk about conserving their high conservation values area. They don't even want to, have a conversation about how we do it together. So when it comes to farmers training, they're okay with it, but when it comes to protecting the conservation values, they're just not willing to do that. So, you can see that maybe in some sense they would support part of the NAP, but it wouldn't be like as a whole as what we expect them to do.
So this is a big producer, is it?
Tier two company. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So Pascal, you had a clarifying question. Do you want to say what it was?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. Right. Yeah. I will proceed my clarifying question with framing of the question. The point made by Costa Rica about, and you, Charlie, about the nature of private sector, whether it's the different type of private sector companies and business, but also the different type of interlocutor, whether it's a risk management person in the company or a sustainability person or a production or procurement person. It's very important. I think the common issue and mistake NGOs make about private sector engagement is to treat private sector as a monolithic beast.
Can I interrupt you? You're supposed to be asking a clarifying question.
Yeah, but let me finish my question. So I want to know the degree to which colleagues from Indonesia have done in-depth research about individual company, about where they are in regard to the issue of sustainability commodity production as opposed to the national action plan. So understanding the company, different perspective, is for me a prior steps before talking to them. And I want to understand if in-depth research has been done before the engagement process started.
Okay, my question is a bit related to that, so I'm going to add it on. And my question relates, well, what I wrote, how much have you segmented the private sector? And do you have different strategies and different messages for different parts of the private sector? So what I meant there was different company types, which could be by size or could be by place in the value chain, whether they're a mill, a plantation company, a trader, a manufacturer, a retailer, etc. And also Pascal makes the very good point, which is different messages for different roles within the company, or at least thinking about the different roles in the company. So at this point, we don't need to go into a long discussion about it, but just have you done that sort of analysis, and have you tried to segment your messages in that sort of way?
I'm afraid not.
No.
So,
okay.
yeah, no, we never have that in-depth study. We haven't. Well, we try to meet with different types of companies. For example, we divided to have like the tier one, the big six, and then the tier two companies like Icha said, and then the third tier companies which are more smaller, and then usually at the provincial and at the district level. We try to get their perspective on palm oil, on government regulations, etc. But and also to the national action plan. But we haven't really go in depth and then thinking of a different strategy for that.
Okay, thanks. Pisha, you made a comment on the chat. Do you want to say what it was?
Yeah, I mean, for me, yes, we did, but I mean, not super in-depth research, but we took a look at their mission, visions, and then their projects, their location of their mills, and then the sustainability reports, just a general due diligence of the companies.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to move on to the next stage of this process.
Can I, Charlie? I think there is a. I just want to spend one more minute on this. Is that okay with you?
Well, I think we've got plenty of time to spend on it now because that was just clarifying questions. We're now going into deepening questions. Okay. So I want everybody just to take a minute in silence, just to think about what you've heard, and just to come up with a single question that you think would be a helpful question to ask, right? And if this process works well, Rini and her colleagues won't necessarily even have to answer these questions. We will get into some discussion, but the type of question that will get them thinking and maybe see a different perspective. So just take a minute to think about a question that you've got, and then when you've got a question, write it in the chat box, and we'll see what we've got and address some of them in the time remaining. So, Pisha, while these questions are coming in, Pisha and Rini and Cynthia, if you just want to be reading them, because you're not going to answer all of the questions, you're going to pick the questions that you feel are most helpful for you.
Can I answer now?
Not yet. We haven't. Is anybody still working on a question? Just let me know if you are. No? Okay, if you haven't got a question, okay, so I'm going to run through the questions that we've got. Do you think all companies have the same reasons not to engage as you wish in the NAP? Pascal, do you want to just explain that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same topic. It's about the fact that we tend to consider companies as one single behavior, why they do not talk to us, but they all have very different starting point, where they are in their evolution, their preoccupation, their interest. And I think we have a serious tendency to oversimplify their motivation. So the question is rhetoric.
Okay,
Do they have?
So there are actually multiple reasons for engaging and also multiple reasons for not engaging. It's not a single answer. Okay. So Leif's question is, do you want to say your question, Leif?
Yes. If I can just find it. Yes. Are you clear before you talk with the company, how the NAP can help and the National Action Plan can help them in their priorities instead of what the company can do with the NAP? And the reason is, I think we tend to jump to the ask right away instead of kind of making and spelling it out what the benefits of the National Action Plan is for the company. And so this often requires us to change our mindset and put us in the company's place. And it can be, be supply security or image, or it can be, reduced risk of some kind. So anyway, that's the question.
Great, that's a great question. I'm going to go to Maker.
Yeah, it was more a clarifying question. If I hear well, you were talking about incentives for engagement. What kind of incentives? Was that money? Because in Peru, that's part of the discussion of how to engage all the sectors in the coffee NAP. And for the private sector, it has to do with money, but not like incentives, but it's in order to order the public money that is invested in coffee. And I just want to know, what were you thinking in Indonesia for incentives?
And it's a little bit related to Leif's question about, what's the value? What's the benefit? And my question is, do you have the right resources, the time, the people, the skills to create segmented, customized approaches to different parts of the private sector? What's missing in terms of resources? What do you most need? How do you attract the necessary resources? So it was just a reflection as I was hearing some of the questions earlier, that all sounds like a lot of work, to think about different different parts of the value chain, different roles, different individual companies, and have a very customized approach to each company sounds like a huge investment of time and resources. Obviously, there are some companies that will be a higher priority than others where it makes sense. But is that viable? Is it a good idea? How would you get enough resources to take that sort of customized approach? So, Rini and Pisha and Cynthia, you don't have to. Well, we don't have time for you to respond to all of these questions. But I'm going to give you time to respond to whichever ones you choose, which you think are most useful to talk about.
Okay, so yes, this is make us think actually about the resources. Yes, I don't think we have enough resources. We actually reviewing our structure, organogram, and then thinking that we need more people for stakeholder engagement, especially for private sector and as well as government. So yeah, so we don't have that, but we are thinking about that. So and then we probably will have to find funding to do that, because with our current funding, we don't have enough money to actually do the segmented, customized approach. In terms of clear messages to the private sector and whether we already show them what will be their benefit in supporting the National Action Plan. We sort of, I think we sort of given that, saying that they can be supporting the national government, what you call it, support, because National Action Plan is the government initiative, and to improve palm oil sector and governance in Indonesia. So with their involvement, they will be able to support government efforts, and also will help their business to probably the governance of their business or their business activities. So that sort of message that we inform them, but I don't know, it seems like it's not yet effective. So yeah, I think. And do you think all companies have the same reasons not to engage? Yes. So you probably have heard about IPOP, Indonesian Palm Oil Pledge, that is taken place, I think, in 2015. The IPOP was dissolved by the government of Indonesia. So they have this reluctancy or fear that if they are moved forward in supporting the National Action Plan before the government support the National Action Plan, they will experience the same thing as what they have experienced with IPOP. So they really want to see government support to the National Action Plan before they want to take action. So yes, I think that's kind of cover all the questions.
Could you just, we need to wrap this up, but do you want to just summarize how was this process useful for you? And is there anything that you've learned from it?
Yes, especially that we suggested to have an in-depth and segmented approach to the companies, because we are very the companies here, or the private sector, is very diverse. We have producer, we have the processor, we have the traders, we have the brands, and then we have this first tiers, 2 tiers, third tier companies. And I think the registered companies in Indonesia, it's more than 3,000 companies. So there's actually leading to another question on how actually we can do it effectively and efficiently, because we need to do the in-depth study first, the research first, and then from there we can develop the right key messages. But how we can do it we have a limited time, especially that the election is coming. That's also the presidential election is coming. So that's something that we need to have in mind as well.
Okay, great. I'm going to have to compress the end of this meeting. We've got another 10 minutes. I'm going to give everybody time to just reflect and capture their own learnings. But before we do that, I'm just going to have like an open mic session where anybody can speak. So we don't all have to speak, but anybody can speak. And I'm going to combine this question, which is what did I learn from this discussion, with the next page, which is reflecting on the process as well. What worked in this, what could have worked better, and what could be useful going forward. So we're just reflecting here on the conversation we've had. Has it been useful? What have we learned? How could we make it more useful, or do something different? So anybody can go.
I will jump quickly, Charlie, for the benefit of colleagues and the Indonesian team. I learned something not so long ago, a few years ago, working on private sector, trying to get something out of them, is that it's we have a tendency of wanting to do what our project are trying to achieve without realizing that there are different steps for them to travel. It's a journey of change for them. So in your in-depth research about a single company, understanding the perspective of the risk assessment people, of the procurement people, of the sustainability people is important to build an overall picture of where the company sits on a continuum, where on the left-hand side of that continuum is, I don't care about your issue, I don't want to hear about you. And the right-hand side is, I sign up to the National Action Plan and found and implement it. But in between, there are many steps. The question is where they are now and how do you move them to the next steps and not to exactly to the end. So having this continuum and understanding where you plot into your company is part of the research, and it helps immensely.
Okay, thanks, Pascal. Anybody else?
I guess it's hard to tell because you know, like you see their sustainability policies, and some of them are actually not followed by the very company itself. So you know, it's hard to guess where they are because there are so many inconsistencies in the practice.
We're a bit out of time for anything more on the discussion on the content. Are there any remarks on the process? I'm happy to make my own remark, which is, you know, I guess my reflection on this process is it's difficult to try and have this form of discussion when we're all in separate places. I think it seems like we've done a pretty good job of having the discussion. It's not the same as sitting in the same room. So on one level, it feels a bit clunky and a bit frustrating, and feels like it moves quite slowly. And on the other hand, I've found the process to be quite informative. So I've got quite a lot of notes from this session. I've been really listening to the issues and themes and noticing the common themes that are coming up. And I guess a key thing that I'm taking away from it is a sense that we could maybe at the global level create some better messaging of things like, you know, options for engagement or pathways for engagement in a just kind of generic level that then could be customized in each country. And also thinking about, you know, different messages for different roles within a company, or different messages for companies at different stages in the value chain. So I think that's been useful. Maybe that's something we could look at in future webinars. So we're almost out of time. I'm just going to ask this last question, and this I'm going to ask you to put in the chat box. So is there anything that you've learned from the session? Anything that struck you? I've just given you one of my learnings. And is there any action? Just pick one. So if we could just spend a minute or two thinking about this and capture that in the chat box, and just you can put in there any other comments you want to make to close off this session. So we're not going to have time to read all these out, so you might just want to read, when you've written in your own point, you might just want to read the other comments in there. Okay, we're going to have quite a few of you haven't written anything in there. I'd be grateful if you did. We're going to have a one-sentence checkout round, starting with, be as short as you can, starting with Pascal. You're on mute. Still on mute. We'll go to Pisha.
I don't think, I think everybody has said.
Okay.
Okay, I'll say all very good. Thank you very much. I think it's interesting to see that we are getting in the meat of the matter after about 45 minutes in the process. So it's interesting to, there's something to learn about the duration of this virtual workshop here.
Yeah. Bart. Life.
Yeah, I'm very happy. Very happy that we are starting this this discussion with the countries. I feel it's really an issue where we haven't entirely gotten it right yet, as opposed to many other areas where we've made a lot of advance. So this is very welcome, and I think it's just the beginning of a journey. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Popo Dedi.
Hi. Tonight I'm learning about how important that we need to do deep research to company. I mean to public sector and private sector, both of them. It's a part of to making trust each other. I think is what I learned tonight.
Okay, thank you. Rini?
Almost the same with Popo, actually. And then actually, I wish that in the next sessions, I can hear more from other countries' experience as well, especially the one like Costa Rica, who is already now at the stage of maintaining relationship with the private sector.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Maker?
Yeah, hi. I think it was a really interesting experience to learn about Indonesia, especially, and how they relate with the private sector. It's completely different from Peru, but I've learned a lot. It's like you get a lot of things to know, and I think we need to exchange more and know what is going on in other countries. So it's really interesting.
Great. Sandra? Are you there? Can't hear you. Cynthia? Are you there? Barity? We might have lost some people. How
Hi,
about...
Charlie. Sorry.
Oh, hi.
It's me, Cynthia.
Yeah, hi.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Hello.
Can hear you.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Okay, seems like Cynthia can't hear. And Matthias?
Yes.
It's me, Cynthia. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I go. Yeah, I really like your methodology, Charlie. It really brings up a lot of discussion and brings people, gives people confidence to give a lot to the discussion. And as Pascal said, I think we need to have a look at the length of these workshops and how we can improve them, using your workshop as a good example. Thanks.
Thanks. Alex?
Yeah, thank you very much for organizing this virtual workshop. It was also very interesting for me to hear about the Indonesia experience. I think in terms of the length, maybe for the purpose of scheduling, it would be good to have during the virtual workshops to know that this time we will have this country's experience, and in advance to have a small paragraph about the issue, because I felt that by the time we got to the questions, we had to kind of wrap up. So yeah, this might actually initiate in advance some thinking, and we could get to the discussion much quicker. Thank you.
Thank you. Barrett, are you there or not? No. Has anyone else not gone? Emilio?
Yes, thank you, Charlie. I agree with Alex and your comments as well, Charlie. At times it felt that it was going slow just by the nature of technology, but I think it will be really interesting if we could have a session 2 or part 2, now that we have this specific questions that we got really in depth about each country case, because it was really interesting as we were thinking and brainstorming towards the end of session. Thank you.
Great. Anyone that hasn't gone? No. Okay, so yeah, I think we can capture from this session the questions that were in the chat box, the ones that you brought to the beginning, and some of the things that came through the session. I think we can draw out some key themes. I think we can probably prep maybe something like a Costa Rican case study or other things, maybe Indonesia, other countries, even Ecuador, Brazil, where we can pick provide a bit of a briefing on what's the status as the background reading, and then we can go straight to the issue. I think often actually it's just getting good questions out is itself incredibly helpful, even if we don't get answers. Often this isn't about answers, it's about finding the right questions. But yeah, we could have done with a bit more time to deepen the discussion. So yes, it felt a bit clunky and a bit slow, but also like we did get to some quite significant points, and I think we can build on those as we go forward. And for me, it's incredibly helpful as well because it helps me identify the ways in which we at the global level can be most supportive of the countries. So thank you, everybody. Matthias, when's the next one of these calls? Roughly when is the next private sector one? How long or where? You don't have to find the exact date. Is it a couple of months or what?
October, yeah.
October, okay. Okay, very good. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Charlie. Thank you, Matthias.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.